Hi, my name is Kennedy Cameron, and today I'll be presenting on the cognitive function of high school football players following a concussion. So, first I'll talk about the impact of concussions, then move on to concussions in football, the short-term effects, the long-term effects, and how to prevent concussions, and finally wrap it up with some final comments. So first, to understand what a concussion is, you have to know how it happens. So concussions occur when a collision causes the brain to hit the inside of the skull. So this can happen from any side of the head, front, back, left, right, as long as the hit is strong enough and with enough force to cause the brain to hit the inside of the skull, a concussion will most likely occur. Symptoms of concussions are disorientation, headaches, memory issues, fogginess, and loss of consciousness. The figure on the side shows that there are four main signs of a concussion, and they result in physical symptoms, cognitive symptoms, emotional symptoms, and sleep symptoms. So, if any of those things are messed up or not normal, they're most likely symptoms of a concussion. How long do concussions last? So, adults who have suffered a concussion may experience symptoms for 10 to 14 days, while smaller children may require up to 4 weeks to fully recover. How to treat a concussion? One should take it easy for 1 to 3 days following the initial blow to their head. Studies show that for teenagers with symptoms, a gradual return to physical activity following a concussion promotes symptom recovery more than complete rest. This is due to the possibility of secondary symptoms like fatigue, reactive depression, physiological deconditioning, and slow recovery increase with prolonged rest. So this means that instead of resting like most people have been taught to deal with a concussion, you should actually get up and start to move a little bit, maybe ride a bike, go for a walk, start integrating a little bit more activity into your life after those 2 or 3 days of rest. Quality of life after concussion. So, the quality of life can vary for different people. Most suffer from persistent post-concussive symptoms, or PPCS. Physical inactivity may predispose patients to PPCS. It has been hypothesized that the psychological consequences of being removed from life-validating activities combined with the physical inactivity may contribute to the development of PPCS following a mild traumatic brain injury in youth. So, the quality of life mostly goes back to normal, but for those few couple of days, maybe even weeks, it's really hard for someone to be removed from a sport, especially like football, that is kind of like that child's lifeline. So moving on to concussions in football, how do they occur? High school football players frequently sustain head injuries during practices and games. There are also specific position differences. Linemen average around 509 head impacts per season, whereas quarterbacks average only 146. Positions can influence the number of collisions, but common mechanisms do not. Player-to-player contact is the leading cause of injury in all positions, accounting for 79.6% of concussions. So this means that depending on where you play on a football team, you're going to be more likely to suffer from a concussion. So linemen are more likely to because they're up front and they're more face to face with each other, and it's a lot more colliding than a quarterback. Quarterback only gets hit, I don't know, maybe 20 times a game if they have a good line or bad line, depending. So some statistics about concussions in football are: boys football had the most concussions, 1,020, which is 7 times more than boys wrestling, which is the next highest figure. Head injuries are becoming more common, with nearly 8% increase in total high school sports injuries since 1999. According to reports, 15.6 sport-related concussions occur per 10,000 exposures among high school football players. And finally, concussions rarely affect athletes for long periods of time, with 43% of football players recovering within 7 days. However, 35% required more than 14 days to recover. So this figure on the side shows the amount of concussions or head injuries that happen in sports in high school and college. And the rates are per 10,000 games and practices. As you can see, high school football is the highest rating in head injuries in sports, with the next being wrestling. Moving on, the short-term effects of concussions. So the emotional effects are depression, mood swings, fear of future harm or injury, paranoia, suicidal thoughts, aggressive behavior, and frustration. So a lot of these kind of coincide with PTSD. So once a person gets hit in the head, they're afraid to get hit in the head again, and that kind of comes with the emotional effects of concussions. Next, the physical effects, which are dizziness, lightheadedness, loss of consciousness, difficulty with coordination, headaches, ringing in the ears, nausea, vomiting, fatigue, or drowsiness, and blurry vision. So these usually happen like right after you're hit in the head and you get up from being on the ground, or they can persist for a couple of days after that first initial hit. And lastly, the cognitive effects, which are confusion or feeling as if in a fog, amnesia surrounding the event, dizziness or seeing stars, temporary loss of consciousness, though that doesn't always occur, slurred speech, delayed response to questioning, dazed appearance, forgetfulness, such as asking the same question over and over, trouble with concentration and memory, irritability and other personality changes, sensitivity to light and noise, trouble with sleep, feeling emotional or depressed, and changes in smell and taste. So there's just a few of the cognitive effects, but there are a lot more. Those are just some of the most common ones. And this figure on the side shows what most of the symptoms are in a head injury. The biggest one is fatigue. Getting hit in the head takes a toll on the brain, so it's going to be really tired. It's going to be working hard to repair itself, so you're most likely going to be tired as well, trying to rest that brain so that way it can get working and healing itself. So moving on to long-term effects of concussion, there are lasting effects to a concussion. One of them is post-traumatic headaches. Some people have headaches related to concussions days or weeks after suffering a brain injury. Next is post-traumatic vertigo. After brain injury, some people have spinning or dizzy spells that last for days or weeks. Persistent post-concussive symptoms, also known as post-concussion syndrome, which we already kind of covered. A tiny percentage of people might experience several symptoms that persist longer than anticipated. Prolonged symptoms could consist of headaches, lightheadedness, cognitive difficulties. These symptoms are referred to as persistent post-concussive symptoms if they last longer than 3 months. Effects of multiple brain injuries, subconcussive injuries, or recurring head injuries without symptoms is being studied by researchers. There isn't enough proof to say that at this point, the repeated brain injuries have an impact on brain function. And lastly, second impact syndrome. Rarely having a second concussion before the first symptoms go away can cause the brain to swell quickly. Death may result from this. Athletes should never resume competing in sports while still exhibiting concussion symptoms. So, summed up, this all means that you can still suffer from the symptoms of a concussion for days, weeks, and sometimes even months after that initial hit. So the next long-term effect of concussion is CTE. So what is CTE? It is chronic traumatic encephalopathy. It is caused by recurring head injuries. These brain changes develop and worsen over time, and they may not be apparent for months, years, or decades after the initial brain injury. Typical symptoms include aggression, depression, memory loss, and poor judgment. CTE has 5 stages. Several former athletes who have CTE went on to commit suicide. So, CTE takes all of the worst symptoms of a concussion and kind of pushes them to their limit, and it really affects the brain, and it's normally not caught until too late. So the figure on the side shows what a normal brain looks like and what advanced CTE looks like. So as you can see, having those constant symptoms, those constant problems with your cognitive and your sleep and physical, emotional, memory, all that stuff is kind of eating away at your brain. And you can see why people who have CTE went on to commit suicide, because obviously their brain is not right. So some statistics of CTE are 177 out of 202 deceased football players were diagnosed with CTE, and CTE changes were found in 10 out of 14 professional athletes and 1 out of 3 high school athletes. So on the side, this shows 4 of the stages of CTE, and you can see that the more severe the CTE gets, the more likely the person is going to die, either from old age or most commonly suicide. So as you can see in stage 4, there's a lot more deaths than there is in stage 1. Moving on to how to prevent concussions. One of the best ways to prevent a concussion is wearing a helmet and a mouth guard. It's not most common, it's not most likely to prevent a concussion, but it can definitely help. So, like I said, no helmet can completely prevent concussions. However, it can reduce the severity of the impact and absorb some of the shock from the hit. So, the best helmet for football players is the WHES. It's an industry leader in reducing head injuries. The WHES 02R Matrix IED Trench is the top rated helmet in 2023. This is because it uses customized 3D printed padding rather than foam to absorb the hits. It is regarded as the best player head protection available. So on the side, you can see the chart that rates all of the most commonly used football helmets, and at the top is the WHES 02R Matrix ID Trench. So most high school football programs uses Rydell, or they use some other kind of cheaper helmet that is more available to all of their teams and they can easily get replaced and it's cheap to fix, where these programs should be using more high-tech helmets that are going to protect the students rather than harm them. So that foam that they have inside the helmet actually doesn't really do anything. It doesn't do as much as they think it does. It doesn't absorb anything. It's kind of just like another hard rock that just hits against the skull or the cheek or something like that, and nothing's being absorbed like it should be. Another way to prevent concussions is to change the safety guidelines. So this comes for after the concussion. This is the evaluation and whether the student football players should be going back to play. And one of those safety guidelines is rapid screening. While on the sidelines, players should be evaluated for 3 symptoms: loss of consciousness, stiff body, or balance problems. Players who exhibit any of these 3 signs should be removed from the game immediately and taken to the hospital because they are all dangerous. A coach or athletic trainer should use a quick screening tool such as SCAT5 for players who do not have any serious symptoms. Another safety guideline is no return to play. A player with a diagnosed concussion should not return to play on the same day. Another is reevaluation. A physician should examine a player after the initial hit. If their symptoms worsen over the next few days, they should be seen again. When a concussion is diagnosed, an athlete should have a thorough neurological examination and cognitive testing. Rest. The brain can heal from an injury when it is rested because it is less taxed. Complete rest includes both physical and mental rest. This means no television, reading, or schoolwork. After 24 to 48 hours of rest, athletes can gradually increase their level of activity. And finally, gradual return to sports. Adults may require those 10 to 14 days, and children may require 4 full weeks to fully recover. The athlete should start with low intensity exercise that does not cause any symptoms and gradually increase to higher intensity. If an athlete develops symptoms from more strenuous activities such as running, they should stop and do some light walking. So all these guidelines are after that hit happens. There's nothing you can really do to prevent getting hit, but what we can do is help after the hit to help that concussion heal faster. And these are just some of the ways that can help not put that student football player back in danger, putting them back in the game too early. You just want to double, triple check that they are concussion free before you end up putting them back in the game and they're hitting again. Another way to prevent concussions is rule changes. So these changes mean they're not changing the rules of the game of football, they're just changing the rules so that way the players don't get hurt. One of the rule changes is the crown of the helmet rule, or CHR, otherwise known as spearing. One of the new regulations penalizes offensive and defensive ball carriers for making eye contact with the top of their helmet. This type of play is extremely dangerous for both players because one player uses his head to hit the other's head. This type of hit now results in a 15-yard penalty. It reduces the likelihood of all head and neck injuries by 34%. So this means by just taking away that one opportunity for a player to hit another player with their head reduces a ton of head and neck injuries. So it's not changing the game of football, it's just changing that one little detail so that way nobody gets hurt. Another new rule requires an unaffiliated neurotrauma consult, UNC, to be present at all games. That any player who appears to be lacking in motor stability or balance be evaluated, and that players who have previously been evaluated for a concussion during a game be re-evaluated within 24 hours of the original evaluation. To better protect players' safety, it is recommended that the decision be made by an expert who is not affiliated with either team. So this just means that there should be somebody who is more trained in concussions and neurology to be present at games so that way if it seems that somebody had a concussion or a severe brain injury that someone is there to take a look at them, take care of them. If it's severe enough, take them out of the game, send them to a hospital, or at least take them out of the game and reevaluate. And this way it doesn't seem that they're being impartial anywhere to anybody. And some final comments. An adult or child who has experienced one concussion is more vulnerable to another. For example, a study conducted on football players in high school and college discovered that those who have had concussions were nearly 6 times more likely to have another one in the following 5 years. So this means that it's kind of like, for example, like a stroke. Like you have it that one time, you're more prone to have it in the future as you get older and as you get weaker. The next is long-term physical consequences include the elevated risk of Alzheimer's disease, sudden memory loss, difficulty speaking and thinking. Long-term emotional effects include depression, personality changes, aggression, and social inappropriateness are also associated with this. So this means that after that concussion, it can lead to multiple different things that can happen in a person. You can't really blame them for what they're acting like, what they're talking like, anything like that, because their brain is honestly different than how it is normally. And that's also kind of why they have that elevated risk of Alzheimer's disease. So you need to be careful when it comes to getting hit in the head, because if you get hit in the head too many times, you can develop CTE, Alzheimer's disease, or be more prone to things like memory loss and effects like that. So that's my presentation. Thank you for listening. I hope you learned just a little bit about concussions, and thank you.